Am I audible, Siddharth?
Yes, you are audible, Abhishek ji.
Okay, so we can start. We have with us
Yes, you are audible, Abhishek ji.
Tenjin Lakshya sir, and he is spokesperson of Central Tibetan
Yes,
Administration.
you are audible, Abhishek ji.
Tenjin our moderator Navina, who is a student of international politics at Jawaharlal Nehru University
you are
and has been a
audible,
vocal
Abhishek ji.
supporter of our moderator Navina, who is will be interviewing him, and he will be giving detailed information about our speaker and will be interviewing him, and he will be giving detailed information about our speaker and will be overviewing.
Good evening to all those who've been generous enough to make time for us, the Red Lantern Analytica. And we're here to discuss why Tibet matters for India in Red Lantern Analytica. And we're here to discuss why Tibet matters for India in the 21st century. I'll be your host for the event, and my name is Navina. And at the why Tibet matters, doing my master's from JNU in politics with a specialization in international studies. And I have been fortunate also in the past to have kept myself associated with the noble cause of Tibet's freedom. And I'm glad to have with me today Mr. Tenzin Lekshe sir for our discussion. Mr. Lekshe is the spokesperson of the Central Tibetan Administration, and he over the years has observed the China-Tibet issue and has handled the Central Tibetan Administration. He's worked in the Department of Information and IR at the Tibet issue and the Dalai Lama and the Tibet policy station as well. And with the information and IR at the Tibet issue and the Dalai Lama for your presence, sir. I'd like to say some more things before I hand over to him. Tibet's cause is an issue which the international community of lawyers, policymakers, organizations, and political leaders cause is an issue which at the forefront, but it poses a serious question to our international law system and political will, and also the moral principles on the basis of which those states transact. The exponential rise in China's assertiveness and its revisionist transact wreaked havoc on communities' life and its culture, and the crimes against humanity forced visit and the community culture imperialism are the crimes against humanity and its culture, and the crimes against the history of the crimes that are the crimes against humanity and its culture, and the crimes against humanity, however, the crimes that are currently adventurers in LAC, in South China Sea, and Indo-Pacific at large, is a clarion call adventurers in police. So with all this background, Indo-Pacific at large, West South clarion call, and what is clarion call, with all this adventurers in LAC, West South China Sea, and Indo-Pacific at large, West South clarion call, adventurers I request
to discuss about how relevant that is to China in the 21st century. Now, to discuss about how relevant that is to has been able since the time of century tectonic lights. To discuss about how relevant that is behind has been able since the time of century tectonic is a place called Tibet lights. Since I was born in India, how relevant that is behind has been able since the universities. We always encounter many people. Since I was very sympathetic to behind, but somehow we always Tibet. We always encounter many people. Since I was very sympathetic, there is a minimal understanding behind, but somehow therefore what I will do right now, we understand encounter many people. What is Tibet? There is a minimal understanding. I will introduce somehow therefore. So over the years, there are many jargons which are being used. What is Tibet? There is a minimal understanding. Many nomenclatures somehow used on Tibet. Therefore, so over the years, there are many jargons during the colonial time. What is Tibet? There is a minimal understanding. Tibet, many nomenclatures somehow used on Tibet for their own. So over the years, Tibet was called as a buffer. And for the Hindus, because there is Kailash Parvat, the abode of Shiv, right? It's a very, very significant, very sacred mountain which is in Tibet, but very symbolic to Hindus and Indians, also Jains. Even the Tibetans also consider it as it is sacred. And for the Tibetans, for millennia, because this is the roof of the world, where 46,000 glaciers are in presence. We call Tibet as the land of snow. But there are many people who can say that Tibet is the third pole. There are people who say that Tibet is the rainmaker of Asia. There are also ecologists, and there are many people who are concerned with ecology, says that Tibet is the water tower of Asia. There are many names, but connected to Tibet. But Tibet has a sizable amount of land and territory, which is somewhere around 2.5 million square kilometer. Roughly, when you look at the western part of India, right from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh, on the other side of the border is all Tibet. It is not a small state like Sikkim and Manipur and others. Like many people say, "Oh, Tibet, we know it's a very small thing," but Tibet is huge. Territorially, it's very huge. In fact, as I said before, right, there's a water tower of Asia. Tibet has been called as the water tower of Asia because Tibet has Asia's 10th largest river originated from Tibet. The source are in Tibet. You can call it Satluj, Indus, Brahmaputra, Yangtze, Mekong, Salween, Irrawaddy. All these big rivers, perennial rivers, has its source base in Tibet. So Tibet, when you look at Tibet, how relevant it is for India in this 21st century, you don't have to talk about just border. But after I accepted this invitation, we had the issue and the incursions and the clashes on the border in Tawang sector. And whenever you look at the border, it never was India-China border. Historically, it's India-Tibet border. And it is evident from the fact that in India, there's Indo-Tibetan border force. Indo-Tibetan border police exists still now. So when did China came in the scene? Only after China occupied Tibet, and only after Tibet was invaded by China, then only India came in close contact with China. That was a recent past, 60 years from now, only after 1959. But India-Tibet relationship goes beyond millennia. When you look at the physical relationship, the borders, topography, when you look at the culture, when you look at the originations of the race, there are theories or schools of thought which says that Tibetan race, right, comes from India. And it has Tibetan culture, Buddhism, everything has to come, language, everything comes from India. Somehow, like when you look at language, the Tibetan language, it is different from Chinese language. We have a distinct language, and the language has something to do with the Devanagari script, which is Indian script. In Hindi, we have ka, ka, ga, ga, nga, something like that, right? But in the Tibetan, we have ka, ka, kanga, cha, cha, chanya, ta, ta, tana, very similar to the consonants, and all these things are very similar. The Buddhism, the Bodh Dharma also, we used to call ourselves as Chela, and we, with pride, used to honor India as our guru. And not just we are Chelas, but we also used to say that we are faithful Chelas. Over centuries, when you look at India-Tibet relationship, there wasn't any kind of border, restricted border. There wasn't any kind of tensions all throughout the borders. As of now, they said that there is 3,488 kilometers right from Ladakh to Arunachal. Right now, the border in the eyes of China is disputed. Everywhere, the Galwan issue is not being resolved. We have seen the incidents in Nagula in 2021. At the end of 22, we are witnessing a clash in Tawang. In future, God knows where the clash will be, where the intrusions will be, where the transaggressions will be. So therefore, it's a very disturbing thing to understand or to know that in the recent past, after China occupied Tibet, the borders has been sensitized and restricted, and all the traditional paths which connects with Tibet are closed. In early times, there used to be a Rampur Mela in Himachal, where the Tibetan traders used to come over here and sell their items, and then bring back the Indian items. Now that also got closed. But the visibility, the movement along the borders has been restricted. If you look at the culture, the Buddhist culture, it has its own originations from India. Since from the 7th centuries, but the Tibetan king invited the great Indian masters like Guru Pema Sambhava, Chandrarakshita, Adisha Dibankara, Kamal Lashila, all these great masters were being called to Tibet, and we have introduced the Buddhism based on the Nalanda traditions. But somehow, when you look at China right now, they claim Tibetan Buddhism as Chinese characterizations. They are very good in saying that everything is Chinese characteristics, whether it's a socialist, whether it's a Buddhism, or any ways of life they used to call democracy or whatever they call, they always try to coin as Chinese characteristics. In fact, it was not. It was a factual mistake. It's a deliberate attempt to synthesize everything. So far, Tibet, since Chinese occupation, has been very critical. We face an existential threat on our culture, on our tradition, on our custom, on our national identity, on our ecology. And the threat goes on. There's a huge assimilations, right, which has been driven by Chinese heartland policies. Every now and then, the Chinese people are being pushed into Tibet to resettle in Tibet so that the Tibetans became minority in their own homeland. When we look at ecology, now we always have this kind of a question. The Tibetans always try to resolve the Sino-Tibetan conflict since the time when we came to India, since the time we've been exiled. We try to raise the voice for the aspirations of the Tibetan people. And in Tibet, now, as I said before, 46,000 glaciers are melting, unfortunately. The pristine climate and environments are being changing because the drastic infrastructural development which are being taking place with lots of exploitations of resources. And for that one, now it has been told that the rise in temperature inside Tibet has been twice as much as any other cities in the world. So there is a climate change happening inside Tibet. The global warming is taking place in Tibet. So are Tibetans going to be the victim only because of the Chinese massive infrastructural development and the exploitation of resources inside Tibet? No. Everybody is going to face the problem, especially those countries who have the Tibetan rivers. It is not that the Tibetan rivers, right, goes within Tibet and close at Tibet. It's the transnational rivers. So the ecology, even though it's a political subject, but because of the problems which are facing inside Tibet, there is a transnational problem. So therefore, in Tibet, we have the architectural designs, the housing, the buildings of bay, as per the weather conditions, as per the dry conditions, which has been there for centuries. But now the new normal is we have experimenting floods, mudslides, landslides. It has become a new normal inside Tibet. And it is not just in Tibet, but even in Himalayan states, also in India. In early days, we heard about Assam floods only. But now we have witnessed floods in Jammu, Kashmir, Ladakh, right, Himachal, Uttarakhand, everywhere around the Himalayan borders. In all the Himalayan states, we are witnessing floods. Why? Because the glaciers are melting. There's a heavy exploitations, extractions going on Tibetan plateau. Now the question remains whether if we cannot check those things, if the ecological disturbance remain unchecked, then in the long term, the question is, will there be any glaciers in Tibet? If there is no glaciers in Tibet, where will all the rivers, especially in India, concerning India, where will be the Indus? Where will be the Satluj? Where will be the tributaries of Gangas, which flows from Himalaya, from behind Tibet? Where will be the Brahmaputras? So it is in an alarming state to call in the distant future, if it is unchecked, if the Tibetan ecology is not being revitalized, there will be security issues. India's interest will be under stake. It is not the war, but the drought and the famine and the food security issue will pay the price for India. And those rivers will remain only in name, like Saraswati River. In the distant future, if Indians are not concerned on Tibet's ecology, then it will be a difficult time, not just for the Tibetans, but all the low riparian countries, including China as well. China have a huge drought problem along the Yangtze, along the Yellow rivers. It's obvious. There's an exploitation of rivers. There's an exploitation of Tibet's plateau. So therefore, we need to check. We need to let our voice for the Tibet's ecology be heard, so that it will help sustain all the livelihoods of the people, which connects with the Tibet plateau. Somehow, when you look at the datas, out of 7 billion population in the world, 3 billion people are connected with the foods produced from the rivers basins which flows from Tibet. And 1.9 billion people are connected with their livelihoods through the Tibetan rivers. So it is not the problem of Tibet alone. It's a problem of existence. It's a problem of India's security. It's a problem of India's survival also. Therefore, Indians, whenever we talk to Indians, we feel grateful to the Indian government, Indian public for the sympathy and support. But the question is, will the sympathy and support works alone? We have more than 1 billion people of sympathy, of huge sympathies. But they didn't work. We are still here. We are still struggling. We are still raising our voice. And therefore, we used to say that enough with the sympathy. India's stake is also being involved. Therefore, India should be involved in cautioning about Tibet issues to the Chinese government. Not for the sake of the Tibetans, but for the sake of the India. India's interest is very much involved. And in fact, now we have lived in India for more than 60 years. We've been grateful. We always put the banner of India high. Right? We always had this kind of a, as I said before, faithful chela. Right? We have this kind of gratitude and all these things. Our culture, our tradition is all connected with Indian roots. If the Tibetan culture, Tibetan language, Tibetan identity disappears from this world, who's going to read those great canons of Buddhism? The Tibetans have preserved those canons for over thousands of years. When our grandparents, when they came into exile, the most precious thing they carry with them are those scriptures, which are being preserved right now. So are they only for the museum to be displayed, or are they to be introduced or to propagate for the well-being of the humanity? As His Holiness rightly said, that the Buddhism is not just a religion. It can be categorized into three things. First one, Buddhism can be of morality, human values, compassion, inner values, love, harmony. These are all universal. It is not just about Buddhism. It's a universal. Buddhism teaches all these values. And Buddhism is also about science. The Buddhism which we got from India is about quantum physics, it's about psychology, it's about sociology, it's about mind science. It's very much relevant as of now. This is also universal. In fact, His Holiness used to jokingly say that the Western psychology is kindergarten compared to Indian psychology, ancient Indian knowledge systems. So there are so many values, there are so many knowledge, there are so many things which are involved in those scriptures, which need to be introduced, which need to be come forward, and it need not to be remain in display alone. It should be living. This is Indian knowledge system, which we have preserved. Right. So therefore, if in Tibet, it's difficult. Keeping just a photo of His Holiness is a crime. The people who are being possessed with a photo of His Holiness goes to jail and being relinquished for many years in imprisonment, just by simply having a photo of their spiritual leader. His Holiness has already devolved political leadership. Still now, people are facing problems. Still now, China fears the radiance of His Holiness, the charisma of His Holiness, right? The aura of His Holiness, the binding all the humanities to work for justice, peace, harmony. And His Holiness always used to say that India should be the model for the world to live as a peaceful, harmonious society. So therefore, I think, because I'm not going to deal with many things, because Tibet issue has been a very complex issue, and there are many things to be learned, there are many things to be discussed, there are many things to be understood, and I believe that Indians, for your own security, for your own interest, it is very important to understand Tibet. Right now, to my understanding, there is no scholarship on Tibet among the Indians. There is a very limited resources in understanding Tibet, even though emotionally it's everywhere on Tibet. But the scholarship and understanding on Tibet is very limited. So therefore, it is very difficult to frame a policy on Tibet, to frame a wide and rational policy on Tibet, because not much the people knows about Tibet. So it is a high time to understand Tibet, to know about Tibet, not for the sake of the Tibetans, not just for the sake of the Tibetans, but for the sake of India. India need to build up their scholarship on Tibet studies. And India is rising. We compliment India for rising higher. We always feel that India should rise above everybody, to spread the message of peace, love, harmony, right? The benign nature of India should spread around. So for that one, I think India need to keep your own culture intact. But India cannot afford to replicate Western ideas, Western knowledge, by leaving your own culture away from you. You have a very rich culture. Whatever we have preserved, it's not that we have the privilege of preserving it. We took a toll of preserving it. The Tibetan masters, Tibetan king have sacrificed for preserving the Indian knowledge system. So therefore, I think we have a very young Indian audience over here. I know you have many questions, right? And it's a very complicating subject, but it is a very temporal subject, right? It is the need of the time for India to understand Tibet before it is too late for India to cope. And the time is taking for India also, because you have an adversary on the other side who is very belligerent, who is very assertive, who have this kind of who use any coercive measures to fulfill their aspirations. But India could overcome those things not by being like them, but by introducing your own power, that is a soft power. So therefore, I will wind it up, and there are many things which can be told as per history, right? But since I'm not a historian, so I'm not going to dwell on that. But at this contemporary stage, as a Tibetan, what we aspire for is important. As I told before, the colonial powers coined us as buffer. But we Tibetans are not an inactive player. We Tibetans can be the bridge between India and China. So far, as of now, our place is not being intact. We are struggling here and there. India and China do not talk about Tibet issue at all. Once they did in 1954, that was a blunder. It was a Panchil agreement. But it put the Tibetan fate as being refugee, as being a stateless, as being under suppressed, as being under the oppression of China. But India need to rewrite the history for the future, for your own sake, for the sake of the entire humanity that India can lead. That's what Indian leaders aspired since from 1947. But therefore, I think India has lots of capacities. India has lots of resources. But only thing you need is to focus and strategize and to lead the way for all others to follow through benign, through human, through your soft culture, which is the strength of India. So I'll wind it up here, and I will answer any questions, whatever it is. Thank you so much, and it's been a privilege.
Thank you, sir. We do have a question here in the chat box by Shrishti Nikki. You can read it yourself. Also, I'll be also announcing the question over here. Sir, could you please elucidate the Free Tibet movement and the grassroots level difference that it has brought?
See, what we are longing right now Now, in exile, we have a democratic system in place. We have the Central Tibet Administration, and people call it a government exile. But out of compulsion, we cannot say that, but we function like a government. We have an elected political leader. We have a judiciary. We have an executive. We have the legislature, which is against the normal norms of democratic theories. In practice, we don't have any land, but our democratic values and principles and systems are working in place for the last 60 years, more than 60 years. And as a democratic system, we value different thoughts, different visions, but different principles. But for the Central Tibet Administration, what we long for is the middle way policy. So in a nutshell, I can say that middle way policy is about three tenses. I can just concisely, I can put it like three tense: past tense, present tense, and the future tense. Two extremes are the past tense and the present. So what we long for is the future, where the Tibetan aspirations are being fulfilled. The past, one extreme, the past was Tibet was independent, but we are not going to call for that. One extreme is the past. We also do not agree with what's happening inside Tibet, which is critical at the moment. So what we want is a better future. Right? So therefore, the midway policy is to integrate with China, so much so that we get the genuine autonomy as per the Chinese constitution. If that can work, it can do wonders, not just for the Tibetans, but for the entire humanity. So our philosophy is not just about your own interest, Tibetan interest, but our philosophy is about well-being of others. Even our adversaries, we are thinking about giving. Right? It's a win-win solution. It will help India and China. It will help everybody. It will have diffuse all these tensions. So therefore, whether we go for grassroots, whether we go for freedom movements, the official position right now is the middle way, to talk, to dial, to negotiate with China to resolve the Sino-Tibetan conflict for a genuine autonomy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We do have one more question by Vivek Ranjan, who says, for a very long time, we have been debating Tibet's freedom. However, the Dalai Lama himself has put out the middle way approach, which does not advocate for Tibet's complete liberation. Please explain to us how Tibet, being under Chinese control, will benefit India in this way.
As I said before, what role the Tibetans can play in the future, I have explained it categorically by saying that in the past, the colonials coined us, colonials has termed us as a buffer. With our affinities, cultural affinity, historical affinity, right? All the affinities which we have with India, we could be the bridge. If we become a bridge, obviously India will be on the better position because we are chelas, India is our guru. But student cannot be on top of guru. Just like Tibetans, Chinese are also India's chela. Right. So right now, there is a fear of this rising power, China, India, there's contaminations of this tug of war. There's a tensions between both the rising powers which adjacent to each other. But we will be in a position to tell China that they are chelas in front of India as a guru. Right. So you guys, I think they are young Indians here. Many of them, many of you might be studying in different prestigious universities. How do you see as a student to guru, to your teacher? Respect. What more? So therefore, in the future, if we can get what we aspire for, the genuine autonomy, we can influence in China. So much so that we can be the master of China. Because in China, there are more and more Chinese people introduced to Buddhism. They're going back to their roots, Buddhist roots. Right. So if they are going back to their Buddhist roots, then where will they go? They'll come to Bodh Gaya, they'll come to Sarnath, they'll come to Nalanda, Rajgir, all these places, and bow down. Right. So therefore, I think when India and China competes, there are many times in news, in magazine, everybody talks about these competitions between India and China. Where is India standing? Where is China standing? Right. Militarily, physical thing, political, geopolitics. Everybody talks about geopolitics, but everybody put their rank, right, on where it is. And then there is a competition. So India need to understand where their strength is. Right. Look at the Chinese defense budget. Look at the India's defense budget. How can India match up with China if you look at the defense budget? And at the same time, the militarizations is on the Tibetan plateau, which was never a Chinese. So who will be the victim? Either the Tibetan or the Indians. China by themselves, they know they are the occupier, they are the colonial states. They have occupied Tibet, and by themselves, they know that the Tibet is a foreign land, Tibet is an alien land. And they will do everything to exploit it, just to contain India. So the rational thinking is, how can we take the measure in the different manners, just like out of box, right? So India has its own strength in the soft power. Why not India put their efforts in the soft power, which China do not have? So for that one, I think the Tibetan traditions, Tibetan culture, Buddhist cultures matters. So this is the one. But see, Tibetan issue, the middle way policy is not just about Tibet. This is the book. You can read it online in tibet.net in the publication section. So what I will do is I will simply read the first page, okay, of the middle way policy, the introduction part. The first paragraph, the middle way policy is a mutually beneficial policy that is based on the principle of justice, compassion, non-violence, friendship, and in the spirit of reconciliation for the well-being of entire humanity. It is not just for the sake of Tibetan. Right at the first para of the introduction, at the number 1 page. This is what we are longing for. And what we have the strength of our national identity, that is our culture, our language, and the Buddhism, which is very much connected with India. Very simple. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yet another question. We'll take this one up and then maybe we can see what's forward. Sakshi Dwivedi, sir, in your opinion, what can be the role of international institutions on the statehood of Tibet?
See, everybody longs for their own interest. At this age, every nation states talks about their own interest. We might be the only one who is stateless, who talks about others, entire humanity. Right? Everybody, America, China, India, Europe, everybody talks about this or their own values, their own interest. So when you look at international affairs, when you look at international alliance, international agreements with vis-a-vis China, everybody talks about one China policy. Right. Whenever there's an engagement with China, this is the number one framework. This is the condition. You need to have adhered to the one China policy. So when everybody talks about one China policy, when everybody talks about adherence to the one China policy, who will dare to talk about Tibet as an independence? Who have the guts? As of now, nobody. The United Nations in 1959, soon after Tibet was occupied, then 1961, 1965, there are 3 resolutions on Tibet in the General Assembly. It was just a paper. It is just a paper. Those days, it talks about self-determinations of Tibetan people. It talks about the Tibetan culture, identity, all these things. But where is Tibetan? We are at the verge of existential threat. Our cultures, China has this kind of headline policy, a very repressive policy inside Tibet, that nobody can go out, nobody can come in. You are there, locked. With the surveillance mechanism and the state built up and established in Tibet, information cannot flow out. If one information goes out, you're being jailed. I have a friend. We went to the same school, classmates. He was educated in India. He came from Tibet when he was very young. When he was very young, around 6, 7 years old. Then he did his college in India, studies in India, and he returned to Tibet to meet their parents. In 2008, there was a huge uprising in Tibet, and he was caught. Not from the place where the demonstration happened, but he was caught by claiming that he was sending messages to outside world, sharing the message, what's happening inside Tibet. And he was convicted for how many years, do you know? 14 long years, just for speaking out. He was supposed to release this year, 14 years sentence, was supposed to get over this year. But since 2008, from his arrest till date, not even one word about him, whether he's alive, whether he's dead, what about healthcare, well-being, nobody knows. This is the state of Tibet. You don't have to shout. You don't have to go for hunger strike and all these things. Even sending a message can put you in jail. As I said, having just a photo of His Holiness will put you in jail. That much of restrictions. So the world has to be, because if they are talking about human rights, if they are talking about justice, equality, shared values, then they should have come forward to speak about those issues. They should be in the front, but to tell the Chinese that they have the obligations under the universal law, but since they are the member of the UN, as also being a part of the Security Council, they have the obligation to abide by all the rules and the laws. No, with this one China policy, everybody is silent, and China do what they want to do to suppress the people's voice. So therefore, many people thought that, okay, many countries thought that they are distant far away from Tibet, so it doesn't bother them. But the Tibetan issue is not about Tibetan issue, it's about justice, it's about truth, it's about non-violence, where the Mahatma Gandhi has put forward the ways for the Indian independence, where the Nelson Mandela has put his efforts for South Africa. The non-violence, the values we are cherishing at this moment for the last 60 years. So therefore, I think the world need to understand that one China policy doesn't mean that they have to shut their mouth. They have to speak. They have to be responsible to tell the truth about freedom, justice, equality, things which are universal, which have been suppressed in Tibet. Right? And especially India has a direct connections, right? Guru Chela. When the student is in trouble, then Guru has to take a role. Guru has to be on the front to help the student, not just emotionally. They have to be part of it. Right? So far, they've been grateful, but that's not enough. Somebody cannot work alone. Indians need to wake up and be with Tibet for India's sake. Then only something good will happen. Otherwise, there will be another webinar after 110 years, 20 years, 30 years, talking the same thing without any kind of a competent result. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So that Tibetans have their, own history of independence, but now this autonomy with Chinese characteristics is a sad reality, and that political conveniences, shouldn't be guiding the course of a matter as serious as this is like another lesson, for many powerful countries which today dictate the world order. A multi-pronged pathway probably needs to be explored to take the bull by the horns and help realize the right to self-determination of a people. We can explore about many legal tools, economic tools, everything is available, but what we need to realize is that Tibet is important for Tibetans, but equally for Indians. So thank you so much. I'd like to call Purnima for the vote of thanks.
So on the behalf of Red Lantern Analytica, I, Purnima, would first like to extend my gratitude to Tenzin Leksha, sir. I thank you for your precious time and the knowledge that you shared. It was great to know about the shared culture of India and Tibet. Besides, you were definitely right in saying that Tibet had been forever before between India and China, and India didn't see any invasion from the east. Unfortunately, with the capture of Tibet by communist China, India's eastern border also became vulnerable. The most recent assault on Indian border had been just few days back. Therefore, it is quite essential to understand that Tibet's sovereignty is not only for Tibetans, but also a guarantee for peace for Himalayas. So thank you. I also thank host Navina Singh for moderation and beautiful introduction of the topic and the speaker. Subsequently, I also thank our RLA team members who made this webinar possible. And finally, I thank everyone in the audience for listening to us patiently. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. You may now leave the meeting. Tenzin, sir, thank you so much. Tashidele. See you again.
which is always mine. And it's good to see many young Indians, right, in the audience, right? And as a matter of fact, we need to speak the truth. And right, as India has its own values, right, and India talks about truth shall always prevail, right? Indian emblems talk about it. Indian slogans talk about it. And for us also, truth has to prevail, no matter what. We being hopeful for the Tibetan cause, I think the only thing is that Indians need to lend their hands, not just for supporting Tibetan, but for their own cause. And then we shall work together, right, for achieving what we should achieve. And it will be a better place to live. Otherwise, we'll always see a clashes on the border. But Galwan has happened 2 years back. It's not been subsided. We have seen Nagula incidents. Then we are seeing this in Tawang sector. And God knows, all these 3,488 kilometers are all disputed. It can happen anywhere on the borders. But India do not want that. But we don't even want that. It is what China's playing the game. Right. And so far, India has been assertive in their own policies. India has risen up. Right. And I think that more and more Indians should understand about Tibet, Himalaya, the importance of it. So thank you for giving this opportunity. Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you, Lavina. Thank you all for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.